All right.
Wait, you just said stop recording. Am I on here?
Guys, shut up.
Hi.
Gravity.
You just shut up. Every single one of you should shut up. Hey guys. Shut up. Oh, Mr. Bush, don't hate me.
Force of gravity. All right. So, like I said, we have a little bit of a history lesson on top of talking about the actual force of gravity. So, to understand the orbital mechanics, to understand that, we do have to go back a little bit and actually talk about models of the solar system, like what historically people have believed. There are a couple things on the AP test. This kind of stuff is rarely on it. It's becoming more common. But throughout the year, we're also going to be talking about famous experiments like the Millikan oil drop experiment, the Michelson-Morley interferometer, band gap of silicon, the I can't remember the rest. Young's double slit experiment, things like that. Experiments that you have to know, you have to understand. This stuff is a little bit less of what's on the AP test and more just it's important to understand. And the only times you learn this are either if you take physics or if you take astronomy. And I don't know if you guys are planning on taking astronomy, but we just covered do a much better job with it here. I don't know who wrote the astronomy curriculum. It was crap. So, yeah, the joke is I wrote the astronomy.
I figured.
It turns out, yeah. Anyway, so we're going to go way, way, way back when to Aristotle, back with the ancient Greeks, because it always goes back to the ancient Greeks, because the ancient Greeks were cool yet really weird. So it turns out there's this guy Aristotle. They got your little statue of him, the creepy Greek way with no eyes. Always creeps me out. Side note on art history: anyone know why the Greeks didn't put eyes on their statues?
Wasn't like some of that uncovered lie.
No. They thought that the eyes were the windows to the soul and that no artist could replicate the soul. They were wrong. And then the Roman statues don't have eyes because, like good Romans, they stole it from the Greeks. Romans are fantastic. They barely came up with anything themselves. They were just really good at conquering people and taking their stuff. Love the Romans. Anyway. Sure. I'm okay with it too.
But we did it better. Mine now.
There's a word we're looking for here. What's that word? Anyway, so Aristotle. The Greeks had some interesting views on physics. You gotta keep in mind, science as a whole doesn't exist right now. It's called natural philosophy. And they didn't really believe in using natural philosophy for any practical purpose. For them, natural philosophy was just what a bunch of rich guys did when they had nothing better to do but stand around asking each other questions in the great Greek springtime. That's pretty much all they did. They didn't try to actually do anything with it. But you got to understand the Greeks came up with quite a bit. Most of geometry is based on a Greek by the name of Euclid, hence why it's called Euclidean geometry. Aristotle came up with quite a few things. There's lots of ideas of philosophy. We just recently had Columbus Day, aka Genocidal Killer Day. My favorite holiday of the year. So everyone knows the little story about the whole Columbus couldn't get funding because everyone thought he was going to sail off the edge of the world. Except, oh wait, the Greeks measured the circumference of the Earth back in BC. Anyone know how they did it? Yeah. Not at sunset, but noon. Basically, they put a stick in the ground at Athens, and then they put a stick in the ground about 100 miles due north. And they measured the length of the shadows, identical sticks. They measured the length of the shadow in Athens. They measured the length of the shadow at the other place. And based on the differences in length, doing some trig, you can figure out how much further from the sun and based on the equator you are doing just trig, using similar triangles. What? Arachnes, yeah, I think so. Something like that. But the point being, I think they got like the circumference of the Earth, I think it was in like 5-10%. What's up? 5% off. You have something else?
I'm not sure if it's different.
Who's in a well or something?
I don't know. It turns out history is a little muddled on the subject. But yeah, there's a couple different ideas based on what they did with that. One example with why they might have done the well was to guarantee it was noon. Because it turns out clocks weren't exactly a high point of technology at the time. Turns out we don't get clocks really working really well until like 1700s, 1800s. Anyway, so the Greeks' view of physics was a little bit different than ours. For example, we acknowledge gravity, right? You throw a rock up, it comes back down. The Greeks had this view of elements. They had 5 elements. What are they? Earth, wind, fire. Also a great band, but what would continue? Earth, wind, fire, water. Water. It's not heart. Ether.
And then everything changed.
Ether spelled with a funky looking A. So here's the thing. Ether was the stuff stars were made out of in the heavens. And the Greek idea was that lights go to lights. So rock is made of earth. The earth is made of earth. When you throw a rock into the air, the earth wants to return to earth unless the rock comes back down. Rivers flow from high to low because water is made of water. The seas are made of water, and water wants to return to water. When you burn wood, you use fire to release the air inside. Air wants to rejoin air, and so smoke rises. That was the Greek philosophy of things. Everything moved in straight lines, and things wanted to be with their element. It was the Greek equivalent of the dating game that ruled our physical world. All right? And gravity was the nature of the element, not necessarily its weight. A rock that's bigger might hit harder, not because it's heavier, but it's more earth. And so more earth wants to return to earth even more. Really wants to give the earth a hug. Okay, that was the Greek view. The important thing here, though, is that they held a geocentric view of the universe. What does geocentric mean? Earth-centered. We are the center, and everything goes around us because we are special little snowflakes. So everything moves around us. All the planets we knew at that point, which was pretty much Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, all goes around us, and these stars are in a fixed sphere around us. So basically, you can imagine our little solar system inside a little hamster ball that someone has poked holes into, and there's lights from the outside. Okay? And that's the stars. A sphere of stars where they exist and nowhere else. So that's Aristotle. Then we got Copernicus. So now we're fast forwarding almost 2,000 years to Copernicus. Copernicus was a Polish priest who published a book. I forget the name of the book, but published a book. And he was the first one to consider a heliocentric model of the universe. Kind of. See this name down here? Abu Mashahar al-Bakini, I think. Except I'm pretty sure that last word is not Bakini. Sure. The name I will suck at pronouncing. I can barely pronounce some of your names. All right. Yeah, Kevin's tough, actually. I'm having trouble with it. So he's back from the 8th century, so we're talking about the 700s. Basically, he was a Muslim scientist who we think we found some writings that show he actually suggested that, and actually in the Arabic world back then, a heliocentric universe might be the prevalent accepted thing. We don't know. So this is my time. I like to point out that historically, there's always been a lot of debates in science education of discussing the history of science. Because in the modern view of education, constantly talking about old white guys out of Europe and never talking about anyone of any other race or gender, there's a lot of teachers that have issues with that. So here's my statement on, anyone want to guess the reason why we talk about a bunch of old white guys from Europe? Because their work survived. Well, there is that, but the Arabic world at the time, during the 1500s and before, well, actually more medieval, and medieval ended about 1400. But during the 300s until about 1200 AD, the Middle East and northern Africa, that area was way ahead of any place in Europe. Most of the stuff that Copernicus did, maybe even some of the stuff Newton is famous for, has probably already been done before. But it turns out over several centuries of war and the cultures they came out of, like, for example, in a lot of the Arabic countries, scientists were basically restricted to the nobility. Like, we got the number 0 from them, because apparently no one thought of 0 before. Until we, beat them and stole it. But the idea of 0, the concept of 0 is huge. And that came out of the Arabic world. Problem is, when you have wars that constantly burn things down, and all of the writings burn down, and you kill off all the nobility so you can't have revolts, but you never actually bothered to teach anything to the peasants, it turns out that knowledge gets lost. So someone might have come up with this idea first. We don't know, because everything got burned. Which isn't exactly an old issue. It's still a modern issue. My mom's huge into genealogy. You know what that is? Family trees and family histories and all that stuff. Huge. She's like traced her family back to like the 1200s or something like that in some parts. But part of my family is from Eastern Germany, Prussia, a little bit of Poland, that kind of area. And it turns out she can't trace that family back any further. And it is why? It turns out about 60 years ago, there was this army that invaded across Eastern Europe. And then it turns out another army invaded back. And it turns out both armies really like burning down churches where they keep all the records. And so all the birth and death records and all that stuff is gone. So same thing amplified over the course of a millennia or two. So Catholic priest, he died just after he published it. And basically he went with this whole idea that the sun was in the center and the earth revolved around it along with everything else. Yeah, what's up? I don't think so. Like, here's the thing. There are some within the Nazi leadership believed in some pretty crazy crap. Most Germans did not. Like, some of the higher up, Nazi leadership, Hitler and his inner circle, like, bought into this whole, like, Celtic religion and Valhalla and all this other weird stuff that most did not. So it's possible, but I would doubt it. There was the British Navy that missed because they forgot they were in the Southern Hemisphere. I think I told you guys that story. All right, then we have dude with the epic mustache, Tycho Brahe. Brahe was an interesting dude. So again, if you've heard this, just enjoy it again. First of all, he had a fake nose. He had a prosthetic nose because he got his nose cut off in a duel. So for formal occasions, he had a gold nose that he would glue onto his face. He was Dutch, I think. I know he worked for the King of the Netherlands. But basically, here's what he did. He managed to go to the King of the Netherlands, and go, listen, you know what you really want to do? You want to just build me an observatory and pay me to make measurements. And I'm just going to do that for the next 30 years. And the king said, okay, and went with it. Now, there is a little bit more to that. He was also the court astrologer. Because at the time, astrology was huge. I mean, if you're going to commit war, you got to make sure Jupiter is in the third house. That's can't cause problems. But that's a lot of the reason. That's the reason a lot of work in astronomy got done was astrology, to figure out how to tell the future. I'll take it. So he was the first one to see SN 1572, which stands for the supernova in the year 1572. Because astronomers are fantastic at naming things. He wrote a paper about it. De Nova et Nautilus Aveni Memorial Prius Vista Stella, which basically means on a new and previously unseen star. Basically, there wasn't a star there, now there is, WTF. Which was huge at the time. Because up until this point, the idea of the heavens are fixed and unchanging, because why would God mess with what he already built that was perfect, was prevalent. And so the fact that they were seeing a supernova and stars appearing, stars changing places from where they've been before, that was huge stuff. Now, possibly the most important thing he ever did was hire a guy by the name of Johannes Kepler, a German guy who is currently running away because his mother had just been tried as a witch. He was Lutheran. It was a problem. It was Germany in the 1500s. What do you want? All right. Died in 1601. Lots of stories. My favorite being the fact that Kepler was kind of a drunk. A little bit. Apparently, it turns out when you spend 30 years doing nothing but making measurements all night, you kind of go insane a little bit. And so the famous story about him is he was at a banquet with a king, and he just kept drinking, and he had to go to the bathroom, but he couldn't leave the banquet because that would mean some wine would get passed without him sampling it. So he stayed at the banquet, and eventually he drank himself to the point where his bladder exploded. Well, it turns out you die from that, especially in the 1500s. That's my favorite story. There's other ones of he couldn't leave because it would insult the king and yada, yada, yada. But, you know, whatever. Brahe. Kepler did. Well, he did die, but not from that and not that. He did make his own stuff, but the important thing is he made some of the most accurate measurements possible. Given the technology at the time. He made thousands of volumes of them. If you took all of the books he filled up with measurements of the night sky, you couldn't fit them all in the IMC, and I'm counting if you stack them up until the mezzanine. He made millions of measurements, because all he would do every night, this star is at this angle, this degree, it's about this bright, write it down. I'll check it an hour later. But let's run through the other 1,000 things before that hour's up. And so we would make measurements of a bunch of different objects where they were every hour of every night you possibly could. Sure. But he slept late. Or slept during the day. All right. Yes, he's back.